Hey, this is Terrarium here, and I'm going to show you today how to make a fake terrarium in a jar. And I'm going to keep the talking to a minimum. Most of this I have going at like double speed, just so you know. I'm not actually working that fast. I mean, you know, who cares? But yeah, I'm going to show you how to make a thing with things in it, and sit back and watch. I swear that was me. Yeah, by the way that happened, and that sudden clap of thunder was all over our neighborhood news groups for reasons. So what I'm doing just now with this cardstock is I'm cutting a couple circles to make a base, because we're going to do some paper mache. It's going to be pretty awesome, but I want to have a layer in between the paper mache and the rocks that I just poured in there. And that way all the stuff that we're going to put on top of the paper mache is going to have a foundation. So I'm making 2 layers, and I used cardstock because it was the easiest thing I had on hand to cut. I probably could have used cardboard, but although I've got a proper mat knife just like anyone else, I guess my other reason for using cardstock instead of cardboard is because it wouldn't be too obvious when we put the other layers of paper mache down, but it probably wouldn't have mattered ultimately because it would have been covered with stuff. Here I'm just using a couple rocks to keep it weighted while it dries. So the little tree that I got at Michael's has a little toothpick end to it. Not a toothpick end. The end is sort of pointy. So I'm using some leftover styrofoam to make a little hill for it to stand on. I also did want it to stand on a hill. I thought that would look cool. And I think it did. So just shaved down little bits of styrofoam. This time I did use my mat knife. And I'm just mixing some glue and some water for the paste for the paper mache. And I'm starting with just a base layer of white tissue that I'm going to cover the styrofoam and the base with. Not the base. Well, yeah, I guess it's all the base. Now this green paper that you see on the left side of the frame, this I'm especially proud of. This is paper, I've started doing some jelly printing, and to clean off my plates, I've been using the tissue paper as well. So I've got all this fancy tissue now that I've been using in little projects and to wrap gifts and all sorts of things, and so I'm really proud of that, and I think it adds a little something, even though it's going to get covered up in a minute. But someday, maybe I'll show you some of my jelly prints. For now, let's just stick to this. So I just want to warn you guys in this next step, I'm using some fake grass, and this stuff is worse than glitter in terms of how far it can spread. I want you guys to be aware of that should you try to use it in any projects. I mean, it's a mess. Like, I was even finding it in my food a week after I used it, so it's not my favorite thing. Also, this next thing I'm doing, this is totally unnecessary. I made a little pond, and one of my other little projects that I swore that I would learn this summer was casting resin, so I thought, hey, let's cast some resin to make the pond look real. So It kind of, it looks like water, but there's no reason that I couldn't have just used gel medium. This was a process. So, wear gloves when you do this. Open every window in your house. The cups that I'm using are some silicone wine glasses that I got in a FabFitFun like not years ago, like last year, and I don't drink wine, so they're silicone. The resin won't stick to them, so I've been using them for mixing. And you gotta mix it up real good. Let a whole song play while you are mixing up the resin. And it looks really cool when it's done, but that, and I also put some gold leaf in the pond, I think were unnecessary steps. So the pipette thingy that I'm using, we've got a store here in Chicago called American Science and Surplus, and they sell surplus and nerd things, and they sell lab supplies, and that's where that came from. You can get them in a pack of 50, and the resin is going to permanently cure and stick to the thing, so they're pretty much disposable, sadly. I hate the amount of disposable plastics. I try and keep that to a minimum, but it worked for this project. It took forever, though. So, let that resin cure for a day, probably 2 days. Knowing my work schedule, I probably got in and was too tired the next day, so just wiping everything down now. All the dust and everything, because this is, with all the stuff that I'm putting in the jar, this is my last chance to really clean it all inside properly. And we're going to get to the fun part real soon, where we actually put stuff in. Just not pointy enough. That's alright though, because we've got tools to help us. One thing I found is that, especially with that frickin' tree in the jar, it was really difficult to stick my hands in there to place other items. And what I did eventually was grab my sewing machine tweezers out of my toolbox so I could place items that way, but there were certain things, like there are little rocks that were too slippery to grab with the tweezers. And so I'm going to have to find a different method of placing things if I continue doing projects like this in future. Or just a different order of operations. Like maybe not put the biggest item in first. Also, I totally burned my finger with the glue gun, but that's a given anytime I use hot glue. My fingers just pay the price. Oh, that little gnome is just so cool. But that was like the hardest thing to place because for some reason at that point it hadn't dawned on me yet that I could just use tweezers to get it into the jar. I can't always be smart. I'm pretty much running on fumes at this point, so it's, these past 6 months have been a real wild ride, and I'm ready to exit. That was probably one of the points where I burned my fingers off. It's okay, you don't need fingers anyways. Fingers are overrated. There you have it. That is what the finished product looked like. I'm really happy with how this came out, even if there was a little bit of difficulty building it, a little bit of things that I'm still learning in the process. Those tiny horses are so cute. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I hope I see you again sooner than this. But anyways, thank you. Bye.
And I can't be in meetings all the time. But it bothers me that then she has this passive aggressive, you know.
Take your vacation, come home, and stay there. Okay, honey? You think we can do this?